Now, why is it in the model I wrote down? You wouldn't have guessed. How many people would have guessed when I wrote this model down that capital would be very elastically supplied in this world? I don't think there's many people would ever guess that. Doesn't seem intuitive. Why is it in this growth model? Is it a weird quirk of the model I wrote down that made capital very elastically supplied? Think about if I had written a much more general utility function. U of C1, C2, all the way, infinite number of consumptions. I've written down some non-separable general utility functions. What is it that we're using? What we're saying is, if you increase current and future consumption together, that is, increase not just current consumption, but also future consumption, that the trade-off people are willing to make between current and future consumption doesn't really change. That's what causes capital to be very elastically supplied in this model. In my model, the rate of time preference is independent of the level of consumption. As you expand consumption out proportionately, the trade-off between current and future consumption doesn't change. So now once you look at it that way, you realize the neoclassical growth model assumption isn't even an extreme. Like, what would happen is if you got richer, you got more patient. That is, as you got richer, your patience went up. Then rho wouldn't be a constant anymore. But when you became more productive and you got richer, what would happen to rho? You got more patient as you got richer. Rho would actually go down, which means the longest of supply of capital would actually be downward sloping, not upward sloping. The whole point is, the elasticity of supply of capital here has to do with the willingness of people to postpone consumption. And if as you accumulate capital, you become no less willing or even more willing to postpone consumption, you will not get an upward sloping supply of capital. There's another assumption built into the model that's not so obvious, which is this one, that says there's nothing going on the production side that favors consumption over investment as we kind of increase the capital stock. That is, the effect of accumulating capital on the relative cost of investment and consumption is neutral, right? But just like the time preference assumption, that could go either way. It could be that as we accumulate capital, capital goods get relatively cheaper relative to consumption goods, which would further reinforce this effect, right? That is, a relative price effect could go the other way. Remember when we talked about like the housing model or whatever we wrote down? One key assumption of the model was that the output wasn't used as an input, right? That when the price of output went, that it didn't feed back into the input. And here, that's not true. That is the same output used as an input. So we have two neutrality assumptions built into the neoclassical growth model. An assumption that the trade-off between C and I is unaffected as we accumulate capital, which could go either way. As capital went up, it could favor more investment or favor consumption goods, basically depending on whether the production of investment goods or consumption is capital intensive relative to one another. On the other side of the equation, we've had an assumption on preference that says as we increase consumption levels, our willingness to postpone consumption doesn't decline. Often what's funny is people that sort of argue the neoclassical growth model doesn't fit the world are some of the same people that argue that your time preference goes down as you get richer, right? Because if your time preference goes down as you get richer, you're actually going to get downward sloping supply, not upward sloping supply. People get the idea. People see what's going on. All right. So the basic question then